What does a monster do between breakfast and bedtime? How does someone responsible for industrialized murder fill the hours of an ordinary Tuesday? When Ernst Kaltenbrunner sat down at his desk each morning in Berlin, what paperwork crossed before his eyes, and how many death sentences did it contain? These are not rhetorical questions, they are windows into one of history's darkest minds. Ernst Kaltenbrunner was not just another Nazi bureaucrat shuffling papers in some forgotten office. As the head of the Reich Security Main Office from 1943 until the war's end, he controlled the entire apparatus of Nazi terror: the Gestapo, the criminal police, the SD intelligence service, and the administration of concentration camps. His signature appeared on documents that sent hundreds of thousands to their deaths. Yet remarkably few people know what this giant of evil actually did during his waking hours. Kaltenbrunner typically woke around 6:30 in the morning in his Berlin residence, later than many of his SS colleagues, but early enough to maintain the appearance of military discipline. Standing at an imposing 6 feet 7 inches, with a face disfigured by dueling scars from his university days in Austria, he cut an unforgettable figure even before donning his black SSM uniform. The scars themselves tell a story most people do not know. They came from his participation in the violent right-wing student dueling culture that dominated Austrian universities in the 1920s. These ritualized sword fights, meant to prove courage and create bonds between future leaders, left Kaltenbrunner with a face that frightened even his colleagues. Here is something most people do not know. Kaltenbrunner was a functioning alcoholic who often began his mornings with a hangover. His heavy drinking was notorious even among Nazi leadership, where excessive alcohol consumption was surprisingly common. He would typically steady himself with strong coffee and a light breakfast, usually bread, cheese, and cold cuts, while reviewing overnight reports from across occupied Europe. His personal valet later testified that Kaltenbrunner would sometimes add schnapps to his morning coffee, particularly after nights of especially heavy drinking. These were not ordinary briefings. They were catalogs of horror, updates on deportation numbers, execution tallies from Einsatzgruppen units in the East, reports on resistance activities, and requests for what officials called special treatment, a euphemism for murder. Before most Berliners had finished breakfast, Kaltenbrunner had already approved operations that would claim dozens or hundreds of lives that same day. The reports came on various colored papers, each color indicating different levels of security classification. Red-bordered documents contained the most sensitive information, typically about mass executions or high-level political prisoners. Around 8 a.m., Kaltenbrunner's driver would transport him to the Reich Security Main Office headquarters at Prince Albrechtstrasse 8, the most feared address in Nazi Germany. The building itself, once an elegant art school, had been transformed into the nerve center of state terror. The contrast between its neoclassical architecture and the horrors planned within its walls represented the grotesque duality of the entire Nazi regime, a veneer of culture masking absolute barbarism. During this 15 to 20-minute drive, Kaltenbrunner would often review documents marked with the highest security classifications. Unknown to most historians, he had developed a peculiar habit. He would dictate responses and orders to his adjutant in the car, unwilling to waste a single moment. Time was precious when you were running an empire of death that stretched from France to the Soviet Union. His adjutant, who survived the war, later described how Kaltenbrunner would calmly discuss weekend plans with his mistress in one breath, then order the execution of a group of resistance fighters in the next, switching between topics with disturbing ease. By 8:30 a.m., Kaltenbrunner presided over what was euphemistically called morning coordination. This gathering brought together the department heads of Nazi Germany's murder machine, Heinrich Müller of the Gestapo, Arthur Nebe from the criminal police, and various SS officers responsible for Jewish affairs, men like Adolf Eichmann, who would later achieve infamy for organizing the Holocaust's logistics. These men represented the pinnacle of bureaucratized evil, each overseeing departments that processed human beings like industrial commodities. These meetings had a chilling banality. Coffee was served, cigarettes were lit, Then these men would discuss human extermination with the detached efficiency of factory managers reviewing production quotas. Kaltenbrunner would receive updates on deportation schedules, camp capacity, and processing efficiency, meaning how quickly people could be murdered at facilities like Auschwitz-Birkenau. Stenographers took notes using coded language that disguised mass murder as administrative procedure. The word resettlement meant deportation to death camps. Special action meant mass execution. Final solution meant genocide. Here is a horrifying detail most people do not know. Kaltenbrunner kept a leather-bound notebook where he personally tracked deportation numbers from different regions. He took pride in efficiency, often questioning why certain areas lagged behind in their delivery of Jews, Roma, political prisoners, and other victims to the death camps. He treated genocide like a logistics problem to be optimized. This notebook, discovered after the war, contained meticulous tables comparing monthly deportation figures from different countries, with Kaltenbrunner's own handwritten notes criticizing commanders whose numbers fell below expectations. Between 10 a.m. and noon, Kaltenbrunner would retire to his personal office, a large, wood-paneled room with a portrait of Hitler and various SS regalia, to review and sign documents. This was when the true scale of his evil became most apparent. His office contained a massive oak desk that had belonged to a Jewish banker whose family was murdered in the camps. Kaltenbrunner reportedly found this amusing, often joking darkly about how the desk's previous owner had donated it to the Reich. His signature appeared on orders for Nacht- und Nebel operations, where political prisoners simply vanished without trace, deliberately kept uninformed of their fate, and denied any contact with the outside world. Authorizations for special interrogations meant torture sessions in Gestapo cellars where prisoners were subjected to beatings, near drownings, electric shocks, and psychological torment designed to break them completely. Deportation lists contained thousands of names, each representing a human being marked for death. Execution orders targeted resistance fighters, hostages, and anyone deemed an enemy of the Reich. What is particularly chilling is how Kaltenbrunner approached this work. Multiple survivors who worked in the headquarters as forced laborers later testified that he would sign these death warrants while eating lunch, often a sandwich brought to his desk. He developed a reputation for barely reading the documents, simply scrawling his distinctive K signature across pages that sealed fates by the thousands. One witness described watching him sign an execution order for 37 people while simultaneously eating a liverwurst sandwich and discussing opera with a visiting official. It is less known that Kaltenbrunner had a rubber stamp made with his signature to speed up the process when he was too busy or too drunk to sign personally. The stamp authorized atrocities across Europe. The stamp itself was a simple wooden handle with a rubber impression of his signature, no different from what a shopkeeper might use for invoices. Yet this mundane office tool facilitated mass murder on an industrial scale. Unlike some Nazi leaders who remained desk-bound, Kaltenbrunner frequently took working lunches with other SS officers and Nazi officials. These gatherings at exclusive Berlin restaurants or SS clubs served multiple purposes: intelligence gathering, political maneuvering, and coordination of the regime's criminal activities. His favorite restaurant was Horcher, an upscale establishment that catered to the Nazi elite, where he would reserve a private room for sensitive discussions. Witnesses from these lunches reported a deeply disturbing contrast. Kaltenbrunner could be charming and cultured, discussing Austrian classical music or debating philosophy, while in the next breath casually ordering the liquidation of an entire village in retaliation for partisan activity. He compartmentalized his monstrosity with frightening ease. One waiter who served these lunches later testified that the conversations were so civilized on the surface that you would never guess these men were discussing mass murder until you actually listened to the content of their words. He particularly enjoyed lunch meetings with foreign intelligence contacts, collaborators from occupied territories who helped identify resistance members and Jewish hiding places. Kaltenbrunner cultivated these relationships carefully, knowing that local collaborators made the machinery of genocide far more efficient. He would wine and dine informants from France, Hungary, Poland, and other occupied nations, rewarding them with money, privileges, and protection in exchange for their participation in identifying and rounding up victims. Several times each month, Kaltenbrunner would personally visit Gestapo facilities, interrogation centers, and even concentration camps. These were not compassionate inspections, they were opportunities to ensure his orders were being executed with proper ruthlessness. He had a particular interest in interrogation techniques, and he would spend hours observing sessions, taking notes on what methods proved most effective at breaking prisoners' will. Former prisoners who survived encounters with Kaltenbrunner described a man who seemed to draw satisfaction from human suffering. At interrogation centers, he would sometimes observe torture sessions, offering suggestions on technique or demanding that interrogators be more severe. He showed particular interest in the interrogation of high-value prisoners, resistance leaders, captured Allied agents, or political opponents. One survivor recalled him watching coldly as a prisoner was beaten unconscious, then calmly asking when the prisoner would be ready for the next session. Rarely discussed is that Kaltenbrunner personally ordered the execution of several British Special Operations executive agents who had been captured, despite their protected status under the Geneva Conventions. He did this not out of strategic necessity, but out of a desire to send a message of absolute terror. Those agents were subjected to torture before being shot, and Kaltenbrunner received detailed reports on their suffering, which he filed away in his personal records. On days when he did not conduct inspections, his afternoons were filled with conferences on security matters. These discussions ranged from tightening control in occupied territories to planning the suppression of potential uprisings. Every conversation, every decision led back to the same tools: intimidation, torture, deportation, and murder. Kaltenbrunner also coordinated with other branches of the SS and the Wehrmacht, ensuring that security operations aligned with broader military and political objectives. As the workday wound down, typically around 6 or 7 in the evening, Kaltenbrunner would review the day's final reports. These included execution summaries, new intelligence on resistance movements, and updates from Einsatzgruppen commanders who were systematically murdering Jewish communities across Eastern Europe. The reports were staggering in their detail, listing victims by age, gender, and method of execution, all presented in sterile bureaucratic language. A particularly disturbing habit was that Kaltenbrunner sometimes read these reports aloud to his staff, adding his own commentary and instructions. He treated mass murder like a superintendent reviewing maintenance logs. His staff learned to show no emotion during these readings, understanding that any sign of weakness or moral discomfort could mark them as unreliable. But evenings also revealed another dimension of Kaltenbrunner's personality. He was a regular at Berlin's elite social scene, attending dinners, parties, and cultural events. He maintained a mistress, Countess Gisela von Westarp, in addition to his wife and children in Austria, whom he rarely visited. This double life exemplified the Nazi leadership's moral bankruptcy. They lived in luxury and indulgence while implementing industrialized slaughter. Kaltenbrunner would attend the opera or theater, applauding performances while thousands died on his orders across Europe. Kaltenbrunner's heavy drinking intensified in the evenings. Colleagues reported that he would consume stunning quantities of cognac and champagne, becoming alternatively morose and aggressive. In these drunken states, he sometimes boasted about his power over life and death, making dark jokes about processing enemies of the Reich. Other times he would become paranoid, convinced that subordinates were plotting against him or that foreign agents had infiltrated his organization. Despite his drinking, Kaltenbrunner was a notorious insomniac. He would often return to his residence around midnight or later, but sleep eluded him. Staff reported seeing lights in his study burning until 2 or 3 in the morning. The combination of alcohol and sleep deprivation created a vicious cycle that may have contributed to his increasingly erratic behavior as the war progressed. What did he do during these lonely hours? According to testimony from his servants and adjutants, Kaltenbrunner would read intelligence reports, make notes for the next day, and sometimes place late-night calls to subordinates across Europe. His insomnia drove him to micromanage even from his bedroom, checking on operations and demanding immediate updates on situations he deemed critical. He would call commandants at concentration camps in the middle of the night, interrogating them about capacity, efficiency, and security measures. There's also evidence that these sleepless hours weighed on him psychologically. While Kaltenbrunner showed no outward remorse for his crimes, a doctor who examined him after the war noted signs of severe stress and possible psychological disturbance, though this does not excuse or diminish his responsibility for industrial-scale murder. His chronic insomnia, combined with his alcoholism, suggested a man whose psyche was damaged by the enormity of his crimes, even if he lacked the moral capacity to feel genuine remorse. By any measure, Ernst Kaltenbrunner's daily routine was the administration of death on an almost incomprehensible scale. The Reich Security Main Office under his leadership was responsible for the murder of millions in concentration camps and extermination centers, the torture and execution of countless resistance fighters and political prisoners, the systematic destruction of Jewish communities across Europe, and the implementation of collective punishment operations that wiped out entire villages. Yet he performed these duties with the mundane regularity of any bureaucrat. He took coffee breaks. He answered correspondence. He attended meetings. The banality of evil, a phrase coined to describe another Nazi administrator, Adolf Eichmann, applied equally to Kaltenbrunner, perhaps even more so. His daily schedule could have been that of any senior executive, except the products of his labor were suffering and death. As the war collapsed around him in early 1945, Kaltenbrunner's routine disintegrated. He fled Berlin as Soviet forces approached, eventually attempting to hide in the Austrian Alps with false papers identifying him as a doctor. His distinctive height and scarred face made anonymity impossible. He grew a beard and wore civilian clothes, but his imposing physical presence betrayed him. When American forces captured him on May 12, 1945, they found him living in a mountain cabin, still carrying documents that proved his identity and crimes. Even in custody, witnesses reported that he maintained an arrogant demeanor, seeming unable to comprehend that his reign of terror had ended. He initially tried to keep his false identity, but when confronted with evidence, he admitted who he was with a mixture of defiance and resignation. At the Nuremberg trials, Kaltenbrunner faced justice for his crimes. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of his direct role in mass murder, including documents bearing his signature that authorized countless atrocities. He alternately denied everything and claimed he was merely following orders, the same defense attempted by other Nazi war criminals. He claimed ignorance of the final solution, despite mountains of evidence proving his direct involvement. The tribunal was not fooled. On October 1, 1946, Ernst Kaltenbrunner was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. 15 days later, he was hanged. Witnesses reported that he faced death with the same cold detachment he had shown his millions of victims. His last words were reportedly, "Germany, good luck," showing no acknowledgement of his crimes even at the moment of execution. So what did Ernst Kaltenbrunner actually do all day? He administered genocide with bureaucratic efficiency. He signed death warrants over lunch. He coordinated terror across a continent. He lived in comfort while implementing unprecedented evil. But perhaps the more disturbing truth is this: his days were not filled with cartoon villainy or constant dramatic declarations of hatred. They were filled with meetings, paperwork, phone calls, and routine, the same activities that fill most administrative jobs. The horror of Kaltenbrunner lies not in his extraordinariness, but in how he transformed ordinary bureaucratic functions into instruments of mass murder. This is the legacy we must remember. Evil does not always announce itself with theatrical malice. Sometimes it wears a uniform, sits behind a desk, signs papers, takes lunch, and goes home, leaving millions dead in its wake. If you found this deep dive into one of history's most mysterious and terrifying figures eye-opening, please like this video and subscribe for more explorations of the darkest chapters in human history. Thanks for watching.